everyone, welcome to the 7th video in the Pete McKee Art History series. If you are new to this channel, then thank you for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment and share if you enjoy this video. I'm Ellen, the curator at the McKee Gallery, and today we'll be looking at one of Pete McKee's works of art and we'll discuss its influences. If you're not familiar with who Pete McKee is, then please check out the beginning of our first video, which gives insight into how Pete became an artist and the style he is known for. A link to this video can be found below. Today we will be looking at a painting by Pete entitled Le Chambre. Pete painted this work for his 2013 Joy of Chef exhibition, in which he set out to depict various places, landmarks and people that define and represent his hometown of Sheffield. For example, the Great Welcome shows someone greeting a loved one outside Sheffield's train station. Another well-loved work is Busto at Millhouses, which depicts a Lido that many people of Pete's generation used to visit before it closed down. Le Chambre particularly stood out because of its tongue-in-cheek humour. This painting depicts an imagined scene inside a club in Sheffield, after which the painting was named. Discussing the motivation behind this work, Pete said, "For my Joy of Chef exhibition, I left no stone unturned." So when it came to immortalising Sheffield's infamous swingers club, Le Chambre, I playfully drew inspiration from Manet's equally scandalous Olympia. I love the Impressionist movement because, despite its seemingly innocent appearance, in its day the work of these artists was treated with derision and outrage by the French art establishment. Unperturbed, this group of artists set up their own independent exhibitions and did things their way, something I can relate to. Before we continue, if you'd like to find out more about the Impressionist group, then please check out the link to episode 6 below. Édouard Manet, born in France in 1832, was an unusual figure within the Impressionist group as he came from a wealthy family. His father, a senior civil servant, left him a large inheritance when he died in 1862. Against his father's wishes, Manet pursued a career in art, taking inspiration from the old masters, studying these works at the Louvre Museum in Paris and other European galleries. Manet, despite his respect and admiration for the old masters, was heavily criticised for his own works, which were at the time groundbreaking. His painting The Absinthe Drinker was considered scandalous and rejected by the Paris Salon. The Salon was France's official art exhibition, first held in 1667. The works exhibited, selected by a discerning jury, were from traditional and academic schools of art. Unsurprisingly, these traditionalists rejected Manet's painting of an inebriated man sitting on a wall at night. To his right is a glass of absinthe. On the ground in front of him lies an empty liquor bottle he has discarded after drinking its contents. The lowbrow subject matter was frowned upon, as was the composition. This drunken figure is painted as a full portrait, which jarred as full portraits were usually reserved for aristocrats and royalty. Rough, sketchy brushstrokes give surfaces an uneven quality, typical of the Impressionist style. Although Manet had 2 of his pieces accepted at the Salon in 1861, further controversy followed when yet another work he produced caused a scandal and was rejected. This work was Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe, inspired by the composition of Italian master Titian's The Pastoral Concert. Manet's painting depicts 2 men in contemporary dress, picnicking with a naked woman who gazes directly at the viewer. As discussed in episode 6, nudity was prevalent in Western art for centuries. However, its place in artwork and sculpture was justified because it referenced mythological, allegorical or religious subjects, something that the Impressionists challenged with controversial results. In the same year it was rejected by the Salon, Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe was exhibited at Paris's Salon des Refusés, translated as Exhibition of Rejects. All the artworks displayed at this show had been dismissed by the official Salon. This alternative exhibition was organised by Emperor Napoleon III, responding to artists who had decried the Salon's refusal of their work. Many people flocked to the Salon des Refusés, mainly to mock the artwork on display. Manet's Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe attracted particular ridicule and anger. Among the artists whose work was displayed were many who are now recognised as part of the Impressionist movement, including Paul Cézanne and Camille Pissarro. Although the show was somewhat patronising, it became a key moment in art history, as many of the rejected artists decided to break away from the tradition of the Salon by setting up their own exhibitions. The Impressionists established an exhibition in 1874, which although criticised, continued to pave the way for a new genre of art, Public recognition soon followed. We now return to 1863 to discuss Manet's Olympia. Manet was no stranger to controversy, however Olympia was arguably his most challenging and risque painting yet. A young woman lies naked on a bed whilst gazing directly at the viewer. Her jewellery and the one slipper she wears on her left foot seem to further emphasise her nakedness. At the time, wearing one slipper symbolised the loss of innocence. Manet again drew inspiration from Titian, as the composition of this work is based on Titian's Venus of Urbino, which depicts a reclining nude. Described as a mythological figure, the nudity in Titian's work was deemed acceptable. However, Manet's painting was entirely different. Not only was this work shocking because it showed a modern woman, who many critics believed to be a sex worker, an accusation Manet never contradicted, but her pose and defiant stare was nothing like the submissive gazes of typical nudes in art. Furthermore, if she was indeed a sex worker, then by staring out at the viewers, she places them, by implication, in the position of the client. Her hand, like that of Titian's Venus, covers her modesty, yet unlike Venus's hand, which is relaxed, hers is placed firmly upon herself, suggesting both self-awareness of her nudity and a control over and understanding of her sexuality. The painting caused embarrassment to viewers, as although seeing nudes in art was not uncommon, these were contextualized by mythology, allegory, and religion. Although prostitution was part of Parisian life, it was difficult to acknowledge that sex in exchange for money was commonplace and not just the sole preserve of glamorous courtesans. The work was derided by critics who were scathing in their assessment of its content and rendering. Poet and critic Théophile Gautier wrote, "With some repugnance I come to the peculiar paintings by Manet. It is awkward to discuss them, but they cannot be passed by in silence. Many people think it is enough to pass them by and laugh, but it is a mistake. Olympia is inexplicable from any point of view, even taken for what she is, a puny model stretched out on a sheet. The colour of the flesh is dirty, the modelling non-existent. We would still excuse the ugliness were there only some truth in it, some careful study, heightened by some splendid effort of colour. Even the least pretty woman has bones, muscles, skin, and some sort of colour. Here there is nothing, we are sorry to say, but the desire to attract attention at all costs." The women in Olympia had modelled several times for Manet. The woman who lies on the bed was Victorine Meurent, also the nude in Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe. Her first modelling job with the artist was in 1862. By 1875, she had posed for him at least 9 times and had appeared in The Young Lady in 1866 and Street Singer. In these works, Manet, like he did in The Absinthe Drinker, controversially paints her in full portrait. Street Singer was criticised by academics as they felt the style and content of the work to be crude. The woman who modelled as the attendant bearing a bouquet of flowers was discovered by curator Denise Morel to have been a woman called Laure. Laure, who posed for several of Manet's paintings, wears contemporary French clothing. This differed from the typical garb that exoticized and fetishized women of colour in harem-like settings, typical of paintings exhibited in the Salon. In an article on Art's Hidden Figures, Kath Pound points out that by including Laure, Manet was drawing attention to a further aspect of contemporary society that bourgeois critics may have preferred to ignore: the presence of a small but highly visible population of free black people who had come to the city following the abolition of slavery in French colonies in 1848. Morel, whose thesis, Posing Modernity, the Black Model from Manet and Matisse to Today, which was the basis of an exhibition of the same title, has shed important light on black female sitters within works of art who historically have been overlooked. A link to a lecture by Morel discussing her research can be found below. Her research has shown that Laure also posed as a nanny for Manet's Children in the Tuileries Gardens. Morel states that paintings of children accompanied by their nannies were popular at the time, describing them as very bourgeois, very decorative, but adding that Manet adds a little bit of grit and tries to make it more realistic in terms of what's actually happening in Parisian society at the time, by revealing a black presence among household servants. Morel also identifies another painting in which Laure sat for Manet. This had previously been identified as a preparatory sketch for Olympia. However, Morel's analysis indicates otherwise. She states that the specific formal qualities of the painting suggest that he is rendering her as an individual. There is the sense of an expression, she's not just a generic type. The work, previously entitled La Négresse, has now been renamed by the Musée d'Orsay as Portrait of Law, a change suggested by Morel, who challenges and highlights how the painting's previous name, and many others like it, are an art historical device that marginalised and actually obliterated the individual identities of women. Returning to Olympia, here Law is painted in some detail, compared to her portrayal in The Children in the Tuileries Gardens, where facial features are indistinct, painted with sketchy brushstrokes. Portrait of Law, although clearer, is still defined by a loose impressionistic style. As previously mentioned, in Olympia, Law wears contemporary dress. She has not been depicted as bare-breasted or dressed in what was perceived as exotic clothing, typical for female sitters of colour at that time. Cath Pound notes that there is a sense of camaraderie with her mistress whose disdain, one senses, is directed at the viewer, not the woman at her side. Morel states that Manet's decision to paint Law like this shows her as a free, wage-earning woman in modern Paris, yet the work still clearly shows the limits of freedom in a society which is still essentially racist and sexist, those limits of freedom for both these women. We now return to Pete's Le Chambre to see how he has taken inspiration from Manet's composition. As in Olympia, a woman reclines on a bed, propped up by several pillows. The blanket on which she lies and the way she holds it with her right hand are subtle details that Pete has picked up on. Although the painting is light-hearted, it conveys an important message. The couple, who have just been intimate with one another, are in their 60s. Although referencing a Sheffield swingers club, this location is less important than the portrayal of an older couple in a sexual context, as there is an element of taboo around this subject. However, Pete's scene features a mature couple painted with affection and without judgment, their age irrelevant. The idea of breaking down barriers and stigma around intimacy between older people was explored in Pete and Dr. Sharon Hinchcliffe's 2018 exhibition, The Age of Love. For nearly 2 decades, Dr. Hinchcliffe's work at the University of Sheffield has examined intimate relationships in older adulthood, looking at the sexual health and sexual well-being of older adults. For this exhibition, Pete created 12 humorous, touching and honest images exploring 2 characters in later life, Frank and Joy, and their discovery and exploration of intimacy, creating a public dialogue by challenging stereotypes and celebrating an important and natural part of life that many of us avoid recognizing when it applies to people of a certain age. We hope you have enjoyed this art historical insight into both Pete McKee and Manet's work and the connection between the two. Don't forget to check out our next art history video where we'll examine another McKee work and its influences that draw on the history of art. Many thanks for watching.